Welcome to our panel discussion on reducing burnout. We had a great response to today's topic, though it's not a typical one for traditional healthcare. I feel we're all realizing to a greater degree how burnout and employee satisfaction or dissatisfaction are affecting us personally. It's affecting us as professionals in HR and our ability to attract, develop, and retain our workforce, and it's affecting our success in sustaining successful organizations. So we'll dig into this meaty topic today. For those of you who I have not met, I'm Keith Forrester, Vice President of Marketing, Sales, and Business Development for Kaiser Permanente in the Northwest, and I'm your host this morning. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. Your cameras are turned off and you're muted for the panelist conversation, but that doesn't mean you can't join the conversation. Au contraire, you can simply ask your questions and share your thoughts via the Q&A function. And this will be monitored and shuttled to the speakers. By the way, we did receive several questions as people registered for the event, and we've done our best to incorporate answers to these questions into our conversation. But again, please submit your questions via the Q&A, and we'll monitor those throughout our time this morning. So let's go to the next slide. So that's me next to our panel moderator, Jennifer Stacy. Jennifer recently earned a promotion to Senior Director, so congratulations. And her long title is Strategic Accounts, Labor and Trust, Multi-State, the Feds, and Dental. I believe I maxed out all the letters that were allowed in a job title. What that really means is that Jennifer is responsible for a lot. And all those who work with her know that she does an amazing job with that. And we don't want her to get burned out, but glad that she's helping us here this morning. Just a little bit more about Jennifer. In addition to knowing an awful lot about employee benefits, whether it's healthcare, disability, life insurance, the whole gamut, in her free time, she thrives as a master gardener. She's also an Oregon Food Bank emergency food bank volunteer. So thank you, Jennifer. And she's also a season ticket holder for the Portland Thorns. So with that, Jennifer, take it away.
Thank you, Keith. In addition to the two of us, I'm excited to be joined by a truly stellar panel of experts. Dr. Barbara Belk is the Director of Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity for Kaiser Foundation Health Plan of the Northwest. She is focused on cultural transformation through large-scale strategic programs to achieve greater organizational diversity and operational goal achievement. She is a passionate, powerful advocate for inclusive work environments and culturally competent care. Her commitment to nurture and practice optimism and resiliency in her own life make her a fantastic leader. Dr. Ruth Chang serves as Chief People Officer and Vice President for Advancement of People and People Operations for Northwest Permanente, which is Kaiser Permanente's physician group. Her work focuses on three important people strategies: equity, inclusion, and diversity, recruitment and retention, and wellness and resilience. Dr. Chang has worked for Northwest Permanente since 2005 as a family medicine physician. During the last 2 years, she's not only been treating patients, but volunteering as a vaccinator and leading multiple efforts to support frontline caregivers through the pandemic. And I'm pleased to welcome our employer partner. Keisha Weston is the Human Resources Supervisor for Beaverton School District. She has a nursing background in care management, geriatrics, and long-term care facility clinical compliance and management. She transitioned from the clinical setting to human resources, where she now manages insurance benefits, staff wellness, and most recently, COVID staff exposures and reporting compliance for Beaverton School District. This has led her to have a unique point of view on the effects of the recent pandemic on her staff. Welcome. I'm glad to have all of you here. So as we talk today about burnout in the workforce, we should acknowledge that stress is not limited to those around us, but that each of us are dealing with it in our own way. So we'll start by taking a moment to do a best practice, center ourselves, and prepare for our time together. So I invite you to get comfortable, relax your jaw, sit or stand up straight. And you can even close your eyes if you feel like it. We're going to do some deep breaths, inhale 4 and exhale 4, and really just notice how your breath moves through the body. So inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now take a few breaths on your own, noticing how your breath goes through your body. And if your mind starts to wander, just gently go back to focusing on your breath. Okay, let's all take one more deep inhale, exhale, and now welcome back. We're ready to get started. So today we'll briefly talk about what burnout is, the many contributing factors, how it manifests, and how to recognize it. But the bulk of our time will be spent discussing ways to respond to burnout and sharing best practices to nurture and grow a psychologically healthy workforce. So let's start by hearing from you. We're going to have a poll show up, and we'd like to know, on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being very low and 10 being very high, what is your team and your organization's current level of burnout? So beyond burnout, things are going great. If things are going great, please call me afterwards, because I kind of really want to understand what's going on with your life. But please give us your ideas, and we'll start to see what comes in from the group. So many tend to think about burnout as being an individual problem, solvable by individuals doing less of some things or more of some things. But according to the Harvard Business Review, evidence is mounting that solely focusing on personal or Band-Aid solutions within an epic and rapidly evolving workplace phenomena might be harming, not helping the battle. The pandemic, the economic fallout, the speed of business, political divisiveness, the need to address long-standing social ills like systemic racism have really led us to a pivot point. With burnout now officially recognized by the World Health Organization, now's really the time to build or bolster your burnout strategy. So first, I'd like to thank you. I know you're here because you care, and you've been doing work over the last 2 years to support your staff, your kids, your spouses. I mean, everybody. Some people are now bus drivers, some people are tutors, all those things that we've all taken on. But I'm really glad to be together in this work with people who really care. So thanks for joining us today, and we'll start to move through by turning it over to Dr. Chang to introduce the framework that we'll be discussing. Welcome, Dr. Chang.
Great. Thank you so much, Stacy. And thank you all again for carving time out of your busy days to join us today on this very important topic. What I want to offer you and on the screen is this supportive work environment framework. And I think even though Stacy had just said, burnout is not just about the individual, what I do want to call out is that culture starts at the top. And so as leaders in your organization and the ways that you influence your teams, you have to think about how you're caring for yourself, because what you model is the characteristics that your team will take on. So I think even as we're thinking about how we create this culture of well-being, like we have to do that individual work as well. And then it's about how do we care for our teams and care for the organization. So it's both and. We have personal work to do as well as systemic issues for the organization that we can address. And all of this combined will really help us build that culture of well-being.
Thank you, Dr. Chang. And so our poll is coming in. So poll results, smooth sailing, exactly 0% have said everything's fine. So I guess since you're showing up for what some people have as a holiday to a burnout session, we might have known that. We had about 11% saying it's a little bit extra, but I'm okay. We had 25% of people saying, I'm hanging on, which, reminds me of that. You remember that cat poster when you're a kid, like, it's all okay. They're hanging on a limb. 45% are super tired and 18% beyond burnout. So it gives us kind of an understanding of where we're at and what that looks like. So Dr. Belk, now that we've really discussed how we'll talk about burnout, can you talk about and put a little finer point on what burnout is and what contributes to it, please?
Yes. So I could take about a week just on this slide alone, but we'll get more deeply into that. So thanks, Jennifer. And thanks for doing that poll. I do want to know it's a little bit extra, but I'm okay. Somebody's doing something really great that we can hear from. So regarding burnout, it's not considered a medical condition, but there is an occupational phenomenon that we are seeing an upsurge in that results in chronic workplace stress. And when it's not effectively managed, it shows up in so many ways. So we see it emotionally as individuals, we see it across teams, we see it across organization. We see it with physical symptoms, and Dr. Chang will get into that more deeply. And then consequently, it absolutely impacts us professionally, but it impacts us outside of the workplace as well. So that's really important because we, as humans, bring ourselves to the workplace. And so the kinds of stressors that are happening external to work also impact us. And I want to call out that it manifests itself differently for every individual, and uniquely, it manifests differently for top performers, as Dr. Chang is going to speak about. So if we can move to the next slide, I just want to spend a little time talking about the top causes of burnout. And that there are things that we can focus on to help prevent it. So inequitable treatment of work. Jennifer mentioned the issues of inequity in society and how we have had increased strife and impact on individuals, communities, and society as a result of that. And employees who feel like they're treated unfairly at work are 2.3 times more likely to experience a high level of burnout. That unfair treatment can specifically show up in bias, and often we're not aware of our own biases. We can see them in others, but there is research that shows that we're not even aware of our own biases in ourselves. So if we're not paying attention to that, that's a significant issue. It also shows up and translates to favoritism or mistreatment by coworkers, bosses, and others. And that can show up as well as systems and structures that are inequitable, such as compensation or corporate policies. Second is unmanageable workload. We're seeing this more and more, especially with the Great Resignation. Even high-performing employees can start to feel hopeless and hapless, meaning I have no longer any control over this, as our workloads become increasingly demanding and unsustainable. Role clarity is a significant issue, and that lack of role clarity, because as we're doing more and more, as we're being asked to do more, as we're wanting to contribute, it's really challenging. Only 60% of workers can strongly agree that they know what is expected of them at work. And employees can certainly become frustrated and worn out from struggling to figure out what their managers want from them, especially in these volatile, constantly changing environments. Communication and support from managers is very important, and employees who strongly agree that they feel supported by their managers, they're about 70% less likely to experience burnout on a regular basis. But even with strong support, any combination of inequity, heavy workload, ambiguity, and constant change can result in burnout, even with manager support. Unreasonable time pressure is when employees say they don't have enough time to get their work done. If they do have enough time, they're 70% less likely to experience high burnout. But because of the pressure that's happening across organizations, even if teams and managers are effectively, managing their own stuff, other people's urgencies and time pressures come into, because we work in systems after all, and we're interconnected, that then becomes our problem, and that impacts all of us. So questions to ask ourselves about our workplace that are helpful are, I try to do this on a regular basis. We talk about this on a regular basis. But first question, are our roles and responsibilities clear? They might have been a year ago, 6 months ago, even 3 months ago, and they're no longer clear now. And they may be clear to me, but it may not be clear to you. And our workload's reasonable. Do employees have a sense of ownership and a sense of control or efficacy over their work? Are they included in discussions about how work is done, how important decisions are made, and the value of their input in making those decisions, even if they don't have final decision rights? Do employees have a voice in how they do their jobs? Often, if we disregard that, we miss critical information for so many things in terms of effective workforce proficiencies, effectiveness, priorities, and so on. Is there mutual respect among peers? And is that a cultural norm? And we'll hear later a little bit around teams and what we need to do related to teams, how important that is. And what support is there to help managers to support their staff? When managers are burnt out, it's increasingly difficult to manage others. And I'm going to hand it off now to the next speaker.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've kind of gone through a lot there, what that might look like for different workforces. And I'd like to bring Keisha into the mix. I mean, there's no denying that our school systems have been hit hard and that we have so much more coming into what's contributing to burnout than we did before. So it was a problem before the pandemic, and now there's a lot going into that. So as we look at the additional stressors that the pandemic has caused, Keisha, can you talk about your experience and what you've been doing to help keep the district going?
Of course, the landscape of work has really changed for lots of employers. No matter what type of work you do, no matter where you're working, but schools specifically have kind of been under the microscope lately. And what being an educator has been past is kind of evolved a bit, just because of introducing new mitigating factors, mask wearing, distancing, making sure that your students know how to properly wash their hands, making sure that you're addressing those concerns that are kind of popping up in the workplace as we start to bring children back into the classroom. It can be scary for parents. It can be scary for children. So you want to make sure that you're communicating with your community, you're communicating with your students, you're communicating with those parents, exactly what you have in place to address those concerns.
Thank you. And you're right. It's everywhere, right? Some people have been remote, and that's a change. Some people have been on having to show up in person, regardless of whether we were having surges. Some people have been hybrid, which is a weird model. So it's just across the board, and even harder if people have been in industries that had either a slowdown or shutdown. So that communication is so key. The next thing we'd like to really address is, okay, when you're starting to think about this and think, what steps can I take about this growing concern, it starts to really be overwhelming. And I think the thing to know is there is no perfect solution. Really, we're part of an evolution. So it really starts with that recognition and understanding. And then we'll need to address all many different factors by committing to building into multiple areas that positive change. So we talked a bit about the simple framework about how we could organize our thoughts around this. Let's look more closely about really what is it that we can start to do, and what we should be watching for. What signs should we be watching for? And then how do we start to advance this work? So Dr. Chang, would you like to talk about the signs we should be looking for employers?
Yes, absolutely, Jennifer. And really the signs that we see can be pretty broad, but I think if we pay attention to patterns of behaviors, it can really clue us in. And I think, again, this is recognizing potential symptoms in ourselves and in our colleagues and our team members. So I think, what's listed on the slide is around absenteeism. Certainly if someone all of a sudden is missing a lot of work, where in the past they've had very regular attendance, that could be a potential flag. Or the other idea of presenteeism, which may be harder to suss out, but the idea that the coworker can be there, but they're not being effective. They're maybe missing timelines, missing commitments, whereas before they were a high performer and something's changed. So it's time to check in. And then again, obviously the reduced productivity. As a family doctor, I see this pretty commonly in the exam room of patients coming in with headaches, neck pain, back pain. They're not sleeping well. They feel irritable, potentially developing anxiety or depression or even substance use disorder. And those are all the things that make me want to question a bit more, like, well, what are the main stressors that could be potentially triggering these symptoms? And then if it comes back to be related to work stress or just the overwhelming stress of balancing work and life and all the other demands, that clues me in that this could be a concern for burnout. So I think these are the things that we can look for in ourselves and for our teammates. So back to you, Jennifer.
Thank you. So that's, looking at these with ourselves and our teammates, I think it's, it's one thing to be able to look at a person either face to face or video to video, whatever that looks like for you these days. But Keisha, like many of us and our guests, you serve a large and dispersed workforce. So can you talk about some of the metrics or other key indicators that you have used to help support your staff in that kind of environment?
Of course, some of the most important metrics that you want to look into are your absenteeism. Are you starting to see that your staff that have normally been coming in on a regular basis, you're starting to see that you're having less staff there? If you are working in the field of education, are you having more subs that are needed? Are you seeing that your long-term disability is increasing? You're having an increase in claims, an increase in approvals. Are you starting to see that you're having more staff on leaves of absences? Those are the types of things that you want to pay attention to. Those are numbers. So those are concrete indicators. Sometimes it can be hard to tell what's going on with your staff. Maybe they're not comfortable talking to their supervisor or talking to head of a department. It can sometimes be intimidating to tell others, especially if you're worried that they may look at you differently or they may feel as though you aren't able to perform. You want to give them the space to feel comfortable to talk to you, but if they aren't in that space, these metrics can really help you to understand your staff and see where they are.
Yeah, thank you, Keisha. I really like it's both the data-driven approach and the personal approach. So it really takes the combination. We have a couple of questions that have come in from our audience. Dr. Belk, I'm going to send you one around the whether we are seeing higher than normal burnout or higher levels of burnout for people of color versus white workers. Could you speak to that for us?
Yes, happy to. There's a lot of data that, people of color experience greater stress on a regular basis in the workplace than those who are not. And that is for anyone who's marginalized. That's because our workplaces reflect the communities that we are in, the society that we are in. So if you're a person of color and your lived experience is to experience microaggressions, inequities, people's comments on a regular basis, going into a store and having someone follow you, having people sort of question your presence, having individuals come up and ask you if they can touch your hair. Those are experiences that people of color experience on a regular basis, which causes one to have to hold this kind of a sense of security, bubble, and not to be able to freely be authentic in self, freely speak up, to contradict, or to bring another voice if it's different than someone else's. So those dynamics are at play all of the time. And then think about the impact of level of stress and burnout when that's the case, and you're dealing with all of these other things as well. It's significant, and it's worthy of calling out, naming, and paying close attention to get after it and support everyone equitably. That doesn't mean that we support the same for everyone. That means we address people's needs where they're at.
Thank you. There was another question that's just asking whether we are recording the presentation and we'll make it available. And the answer is yes. So we know that not everybody could come today. And we know it's a big meaty topic. So you might want to share different parts with people. So we will not only provide the recording, but we'll have some resources that we're going over near the end. So, when we are talking about how to address burnout more proactively, we've talked a bit about just acknowledging the fact that it's everyone, right? You can't just, if you're a manager, you're actually on one of the higher list of burnout, a job that burns out, because a lot of times organizations tend to say, well, see your manager, right? But managers are also in the middle of all this change and whirl. So that's really where that structure comes together around caring for ourselves, caring for our teams, and then caring for our organization. So let's start to look into this and use that framework to organize our thoughts about our culture of well-being. And I'll start with you, Dr. Chang. Can you talk about caring for yourself, which a lot of times is very difficult to do as we have so many other stressors? What do we need to do? And talk specifically about rest, if you don't mind, and how important that is.
Yeah, absolutely, Jennifer. So earlier when we had the sneak peek of this framework, I did say culture starts at the top, it starts with our leaders. And I would also really want to remind all of you that rest is for high performers, right? If you think about our elite athletes, what do they do after they run a marathon? They have to rest. You don't just keep run the Boston, go to New York, and then run the next one. Like you must rest, you must recover. And it really is a best practice. Now, I'm going to take just a couple minutes for a side commentary about Americans and vacations in general. So there was a very provocative article in the Washington Post back in 2019. So this is pre-pandemic, but I don't think anything's really changed during this time. And the title of the article is, "What does America have against vacation?" Right, so it tells you something right there. And what the article really points out is that the United States is the only country that's part of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development that does not require any paid holidays or time off. So we're the only country that does not. And so compare and contrast that with Spain, where there's 25 days of paid vacation and 14 paid holiday days per calendar year. And that's required by their government law. Now, many employers do offer paid time off. So that is great, but it's not uniform, right? But of the employers that offer paid time off, 55% of Americans had unused paid time off. So even though we have this benefit, we're not using it. So what does it say? So I think really it's a larger culture phenomenon. And I see this show up. It's true of my medical group, I track the vacation use, I see that even 3 or 4% of our physicians and administrators do not use any vacation during the year, which is quite alarming for me. So I think it's really something deep-seated within our culture that we need to really reckon with, because it's unhealthy. And that we know that, again, rest is for high performers. And especially in these last 2 years, when work has been so intense and we've dealt with so many significant changes and our lives are upended, we must be able to take a break to recharge. So I think that's number one, is caring for yourself, and that, and not only doing that is good for you, it also models that healthy behavior for your teams, right? So if you take vacation and you put your out of office message, that really signals to your team that they can take vacation and they can put their out of office message. And so I think that really reminds me that it's important as the leader or within the team to have really explicit conversations around vacation planning, setting out of office messages, staying disconnected when you're out of office, right? Delegating, asking for coverage, and being really planful around that. Because again, the group will take on the characteristics of the leader. So if the leader's calling in while they're technically on vacation, or if the leader's answering a bunch of email while they're on vacation, guess what? Everyone else on the team is going to feel like they need to do the same as well. And then it's not really a vacation. So it's really important to have those parameters and set those boundaries and hold yourself accountable to that, because just know that it's not only impacting you, but it's impacting your family and the rest of your teams. So I think having those explicit conversations, setting those boundaries, and then lastly, it's around sharing your own experiences too. I have to say, I used to have a really hard time taking vacation, and I would always be tempted to look at my email, and then I realized I would come back from vacation feeling just as tired as when I left, and I was not doing myself any favors. And what I've learned now is actually when I go on vacation, because I only carry the company phone, I actually delete the app for the calendar, and I delete the app for emails, so I can't see it. Because I just know I'm going to be tempted to just hit that button, but now I just take it off, and then I reload it when I come back on, and it's been life-changing for me. So, and my kids also say, "Mom, you're a lot more fun to be around too." So ultimately, it's a win-win. But I feel like when I come back, I show up much better for my teams.
Yeah, thank you. I will say that's, reporting to Keith, that's one thing he does. He's an excellent vacationer. In fact, I've even copied one of his vacations completely. So, I think it's a big deal. It also, I think, shows trust in your team, right? If someone can step up and cover for you, it's a way to help the rest of us learn, and also say, we trust that you got this. It's, we can cover you for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So Dr. Belk, can you then talk about, we often talk about the pandemic as the primary source of burnout. You just talked a little bit about some of these longstanding inequities and vulnerabilities, and this all comes together when you're working with your teams. So I'd appreciate hearing from you about caring for your teams, and particularly your perspective as the Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity Director.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Chang, for that tip. I love it. Ironically, just yesterday, one of my friends said, "When's the last time you've taken vacation, by the way?" So none of us are exempt. But back to teams, it's so critical and helpful to ensure that we're creating an inclusive and a psychologically safe environment at work that's based on trust and mutual respect. And to do that, we truly need to know how to build inclusion, belonging, and authenticity for our workforce, for the teams that report to us, and with one another. So it takes a conscious effort to build it and sustain it, because you can take years to build it, and there can be a few fatal errors that we lose that trust. And so it's very conscious. It can't be just words. It's got to show up in behaviors. of managers, co-agreements among the team, reinforcements from all in a supportive way. And it absolutely requires, back to that equity issue and what's happening societally and in our workforce, it requires us to have awareness, knowledge, and advocacy for humans who are societally marginalized, have experienced othering, experiencing microaggressions and systemic racism on daily, and having daily experiences inside and outside of the workplace. And that individual's experience is different than dominant culture that doesn't experience, and is very difficult for people to really understand. Secondly, it's critical to build and support resiliency within and among the team. And resiliency is defined as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, and tragedy and threats. And each individual and team's capacity for resiliency is highly dependent on the person and the team. So the Go Forward to Work Institute talks about teams of adaptability under adverse conditions, and it has much more to do with healthy team behavioral norms and strong working relationships within those teams. It's about how well teams learn and grow from change under normal conditions, and that's a predictor for how resilient they will be when there are extreme and sustained levels of pressure and adversity. So there are many actions: structuring check-ins at the beginning of meetings, supporting mental health and well-being, be a role model about your own need for self-care, listen fully using active listening and demonstrating empathy and support, paraphrasing, acknowledging, and doing that in with agreed behavior norms in terms of what's safe and what's not safe. And then including and recognizing teams in multiple ways, managing teams' portfolios of work, and so many other things. So those are just a few, and then I'll hand it over to you, Jennifer, to allow Keisha to weigh in. And if there's time, we can dive into more detail on some of these action items later.
Excellent. Thank you. Keisha, we've kind of transitioning to you. So you were going to speak to taking care of the organization. And I know you had some really specific areas where you've provided additional support during this time for staff, as well as just a broader structural change.
Yes, here at Beaverton School District, some of the things that we've done to care for our organization is to add some early release days. So our students are being released 2 hours early. That allows for some professional development time for staff if they, need to catch up on grading, need to catch up on any things that have gotten behind just because the work it's changed a bit in the classroom. So that gives them a little bit of time to do that. Not only that, we've added 5 sick days for our staff to use. Number one, of course, if unfortunately they were to contract coronavirus, they might need some days off if they were to get COVID. But not just that, we want them to feel as though it's okay. If you need to take some time for yourself, it's okay, and you have this available for you. If you want to see the change in your organization, you have to be the change. If you can't make those large changes, like adding, paid sick days or letting your staff out early, maybe you should implement a wellness program. It doesn't have to be large, but it's just something to show your staff that you care about them. I love the examples that they were giving about vacation. A subtle thing that you could do is before you guys start some time where you're usually away, just give them the reminder, hey, don't forget to put your automatic responses on. So there's an expectation that you are not working on your vacation. As the head of your organization, you set the example, and you want to give your staff the space to feel that it's okay to take your time off that I'm giving you, that it's okay to take care of yourselves. And you also want your managers to feel that it's okay for them to give that sense of taking time off and taking care of yourself to your team. And I'll hand it back over to Jennifer.
All right, thank you. We have a couple of questions coming in that I think are really relevant to this topic. One of them is about, vacation or PTO and saying, what is the suggestion for getting past that feeling of still needing to log in and stay connected during a vacation, just to stay caught up? So knowing that not checking in is going to lead to longer days when you get back and work that hasn't been done, and particularly when people are short-staffed like we are right now. So Dr. Chang, I'm going to send this one to you, and others can chime in as well if they've got some ideas they'd like to bring forth.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Yes, important question. How do we get past that need to feel like I need to do this? And I came across this great blog, and it's called The Art of Vacation. Five rules. Number 1, let the guilt go. It's okay to take vacation. We all need it. We know this is a best practice. Number 2, if you're going to be gone, be gone. Right? So just having that mindset, I think that mindset and that intention of why am I taking vacation, it is to truly disconnect. And then 3, this is where it gets tactical, is plan and schedule your leave. So really thinking ahead of time, talking with your teams and colleagues, figuring out who's going to cover for you so that when you set your out of office message, you can have the coverage plan there. And then 5 is plan your return. So I think this is where it will really help us disconnect, is that plan your return. So go ahead and set up meetings with the person or persons who are covering for you while you're gone. And that way you'll know you're going to get that download and sign in back when you come back. And then number 2 is set aside time to catch up on email. So go ahead and block your calendar so that when you return, you have that time to catch up and feel like, you're back on top of things. So I think being that planful will then really allow us to stay disconnected.
Yeah, I agree. And it feels like, in my experience, that different organizations have a different sweet spot, maybe, right? So some people really enjoy going for long weekends, which, I love a long weekend. But what I find is that if I'm only going to be gone a couple of days, then when I come back, people expect me to respond immediately because it's only been a couple of days and they haven't taken anything to anyone else. They just piled up, Whereas if I go for a couple of weeks, people are like thinking carefully whether they're going to send that to me. Can you wait that long or whatever? And I think different organizations have different needs at different times, and helping to try to figure out where is that sweet spot that you can take advantage of so that you truly can disconnect.
Yeah. Yes. And if I can add, I think it's really important to talk with your upline leader and ensure that they share that expectation and understand that you've got things handled. When we have that compulsion to look at email, look at, text, all those kinds of things, I find that it's usually related to anxiety. Like, am I going to be left out? Is my boss going to, devalue me because I'm not here? And I think it's important to have a conversation with your boss about you really checking out. There's another very cool thing that one of my colleagues does is when he comes back from vacation, he actually builds in an additional out of office day that everybody sees that he's still out of office, but he's back in office working, going through emails, finding his feet and those things, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. That is a great idea. And I know I always try to block it off, but they smell kind of the blood in the water if you don't, if you just try to make a long meeting and they figure it out. So good ideas. Another question that has come in is talking about remote work. So I'll start with you, Dr. Belk, but also Keisha, feel free to weigh in around, and is burnout higher for people who have all of a sudden been thrust into remote work? People are starting to get really tired of these screens. I mean, not this presentation, of course, but other presentations that they have to watch the screen for. It's just, and feeling disconnected. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes. So the answer is, as a classic psychologist, it depends. And it depends on how managers and teams are connecting with one another. So are there structures that are built in for people on teams to connect informally as well as formally? That might mean, some of the things that we do are having 4 o'clock happy hours, where we're talking about our personal lives. We might have a little bit of a game. We might just, have a space to just connect with one another informally. So, working in those structures are really important. One of the things that's interesting in particular for marginalized individuals is it's a benefit and a problem. So where we're working remotely, think about proximity bias and speed bias. So we're trying to get things done very quickly, and we have those common, constant go-to people that we go, that we invite and include. For individuals who are not part of that, top of mind, they are othered. They are increasingly not included. They experience greater burnout or increased stress because they don't have access like many people do. So that is an issue and a problem. On the flip side, there's less of that day-to-day experience of microaggression in the workplace. And it is kind of a blessing and a gift. So something to very clearly think about and address and consciously work to mitigate.
Yeah, and I think having those conversations with each person, because everybody's being impacted differently, right? Like,
right.
Especially folks that had young children in the home while schools were closed, that was a whole different matter than those who did not, or those that were working from kitchen tables versus, a spare room, all of that type of thing. I mean, the impact is just so different. Keisha, would you like to talk about your experience there? Do you have any best practices that you have used to try to share keeping that connection?
Sure. One of the things that I do with my team is we meet every Friday. We meet on Fridays at 2:00. We start off with a connector. One of my most recent connectors that I've been using a lot of after I watched a really good TED Talk was to start it off by discussing your failures for the week. It's uncomfortable sometimes to say what you didn't do well in front of your supervisor, but I really want my team to feel comfortable talking to me about the areas of growth, the things that we need to address. I don't want them to feel like they can't bring it to me. So that's how we start. And it gives us a time to connect. It gives us a time to talk about the issues. And whenever you're not in a building together, you're not talking in the kitchenette as you're warming up your lunch. So this gives us that time to really connect, to keep that relationship in place and to find out what's going on with them, even though I'm not seeing them physically every day.
I really like that. And it's actually really good timing. There's an interesting question that has come in. And so Keisha, I'll keep you here to ask, since you just brought up talking about what's going on with your staff and with you and what's gone well and what's not. And then we can transition if Dr. Belk or Dr. Chang, you have anything you'd like to add. But the question is, how can an employee start and have a conversation about burnout with their supervisor? And should a success plan be created to help that employee? And so we're in a little bit different times, right? I know, I'm dating myself, but when I started in the workforce, it was very much like you keep your home life at home, you keep your work life, and never the two shall meet. Show no weaknesses, right? And we're evolving now. So how do we address that?
Well, one thing I would suggest, if you don't feel comfortable necessarily talking about your personal life, is to start by talking about the project or start by talking about the task. Just identify where the issue is, what you're having a hard time taking care of, getting done on time. Just start there in that space. Gauge how the conversation goes. And the more comfortable you become, the more you can give details about exactly what might be going on in your personal life that is causing this issue, if that's where it's stemming from. But just starting at the work, that's a place where most employees, supervisors, where everyone's comfortable is talking about the work. So I'd start there.
Yeah, really good call out as a way to really identify, pinpoint, try to find a root cause. And probably others are experiencing the same thing, right? It's probably not specific to one person if there is a lot going on in that organization. Any other thoughts on that one before we move forward to the next question?
Yes, if I can add, as managers, I think it's helpful and important to acknowledge and recognize verbally and openly that this is a given, that we all experience stress, that it shows up in different ways. And these are the different ways that it shows up. Just like we need to build competence and confidence in talking about racism at work, we need to build those same things relative to burnout. And so naming that, having check-ins, much like Keisha mentioned, to talk about, tips to support mental health and encouraging healthy tips and habits, be a role model to talk about your own need for self-care and have compassion about caring for self and body, mind and spirit, and the specific ways that we can do that: healthy eating, sleep, exercise, meaningful relationships, and learning in a growth environment, and practicing meditation, yoga, going out in nature, religious practices that individuals might have. And we want to watch out, not going deeply into religion, but just recognizing that holistic approach to health is very helpful.
Yeah, thank you for that. And this is really connected to another one that just came in. It says, how do we support workers and ourselves when we cannot successfully find or hire the support needed for anyone to take a real break? Is there any way to get that refreshed feeling when we can't stop the day-to-day work? And you talked a little bit, Dr. Belk, about some of that. And I know, from in the environment that I've always worked in, right, there's some really peak times, and that there's going to be too much to do, and you're all just going to have to keep doing it. And so for some reason, those peak times seems to expand to like 12 months a year now. But, some of it as far as just acknowledging, not trying to gloss over it like it doesn't exist. At least for me, that goes a long way when somebody's like, I know this, I see you're doing it. Let's find those things that we can stop doing, at least for a little while. But I react much better myself to real life versus some, fantasy, everything's okay when it's just not okay.
Right.
Any thoughts that the panel has about how do we help people get refreshed in this real life situation?
Dr. Chang, do you want to speak to that? And I can add on.
Absolutely. I would say I wish I had an easy answer, and I don't. And as you were posing that question, absolutely, that's what we've been managing the last 2 years with this pandemic. We've kept our hospitals open. We have taken care of record numbers of patients in our hospitals and ICUs, and all the while realizing how tired and just physically exhausted and mentally, emotionally exhausted our teams are. And so I would say, we thought outside of the box. We had to think carefully about who can we pull in for help. So we started then pulling in physicians from the ambulatory care setting who've had prior hospital experience to go back into the hospital to take rotations so that we can give some of our hospital medicine physicians a break. We thought about what of our care delivery operations we had to pause again to create enough beds to take care of the sickest people. So we really had to shift priorities and shift workforce. So I think I would encourage, whoever posed that question, or if you're thinking about it for your own organization, is can we redefine the team that we can tap from? and know that we can shift work around, ask for help,
Right.
and know that people are going to step up and deliver. I think we could not have delivered on our mass vaccination site, without the help of 200 plus retirees and community physicians who signed up and helped us deliver vaccinations. And so it's really thinking through, like, there are so much talent and so many caring people out there. So think broadly.
Yeah. And then I think what you can stop doing or have somebody else do, right? I mean, I was cleaning pencils. I've been wheeling around patients, and while it's an additional day a week for me sometimes, or whatever that looks like, it also connected me more closely to that mission, which made it easier for me to work harder. So there may be some options there. And then I guess I would say, and I'll let Keisha or Dr. Belk, if you'd like to join in, sometimes I think we continue to work past the point of effectiveness. Right. And so can we take 15 or 30 minutes and just say, that is it? We're going to focus on something else. And we know when we come back stronger, we're going to get more done anyway, because we're probably doing 15 minutes worth of work in that hour of exhaustion anyway. And so trying to kind of really think that through. Dr. Belk or Keisha, anything you'd like to add as we start to wind down?
Well, I can speak to that, what you just said. If you start to see that your staff members are sending emails at 8 p.m., 9 p.m., 10 p.m., that might be the time to have a little conversation with them, thanking them for their devotion, but also letting them know, I know you're probably tired at those times. You might be a little bit more effective if you take your rest when it's time to take your rest. If you're able to really focus, you can get so much more done than if you're really just working yourself past the quick, and you're burning the candle at both ends. And those late night emails, that's a really good indicator to look for.
Yeah, I've got a great example personally is, if we don't take those breaks, we wear ourselves to a frazzle. And I'm a marathon runner. And the third marathon I ran, I applied, because I had an injury and illness I had to recover from it. So I applied a technique where I ran for 15 minutes and I walked for 3. Ran for 15, walked for 3. And I want to tell you that was the best personal record in terms of finishing time and recovery that I ever had. And that works exactly the same psychologically, emotionally, as it does physically. And to mention that emotional stress takes a physical toll. So when we're going, and we're chronically stressed, it's as if you're running a marathon and you haven't even trained for it. We don't have the capacity. So we can build capacity, but we've got to take breaks. We just can't sustain.
Yeah.
So 10 minutes, 3 times a day, eating lunch, getting outside, breath work, meditation, eating healthy food instead of sugar, eating plant-based, more plant-based diet. All of those things have significant impact physiologically, psychologically, emotionally.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so we will, as we have some questions we haven't gotten quite to, but we will try to answer those when we, if you've left your name, we'll try to get back to you on those. Let's move forward to talk about just the ecosystem. So this is specific to Kaiser Permanente, but it really speaks to the broad whole culture approach. So Dr. Chang, would you like to take this as we start to wind down our time together?
Yes, absolutely, Jennifer. And so I really love this visual because it really speaks to how we think of health and healthcare. Oftentimes when we think of healthcare in America, it's really sick care. Really, it's about going to clinic when you're sick or injury, sprained your ankle or broke your arm. It's about going into the hospital when you are very, very ill, either acutely or as an exacerbation flare-up of a chronic condition that wasn't well managed. And so at Kaiser Permanente, we really try to think holistically. It's about that wellness and prevention, and how do we adopt those healthy lifestyle practices that keep us whole, mentally, physically, spiritually. How do we leverage our technology and also our classes and that connection of patients, as well as our whole broad network of community health workers and educators, not just doctors and nurses, but everyone who's involved in that holistic care of patients. And then certainly we are here to deliver world-class, excellent, high-quality care when people are sick or injured. And we do, an excellent job of that, as evidenced by our high-quality scores. But what I love about, being a physician at Kaiser Permanente is we are thinking about patients holistically. We're thinking about our teams holistically, and how to keep this work upstream, right? How do we stay whole so that we prevent illness in the first place?
So really great allegory to what we're looking at here too for burnout, right? Mm-hmm. So I just want to thank you. I challenge you for two things. Number one is to think about one thing or one idea that you've heard today that you might be able to move forward to start to make this change. And then number two, we're going to put a QR code up here. If you will please give us your feedback. We value your feedback, and we try to build better and faster, stronger presentations based on that. So when we send this out, you'll see that there are two slides that have resources, both for your Kaiser Permanente members, but also for you as employers, including toolkits. So please look at that when you have the opportunity, share the recording, and just thank you so much for your engagement and your work and all that you do to support your teams and yourselves. Thank you, and everyone have a great day.